This was my dad. He was the swap.
Good evening, class. If last week was our penultimate class, this is the ultimate class.
The ultimate.
And the test will be passed out when?
I usually do it at the end.
Okay, that's good.
Better be an essay.
Ooh, I don't usually hear that.
From the lawyer, he wants a chance to write it out.
It's an English.
Did you ever get the access to the document he wrote you? No, you want to.
Did not pass out copies.
Well,
I kept waiting after he came in for you to ask him about it, but he never did.
Thank you, Sue, for leading us. This has been a remarkably rich read. I've really enjoyed it. As I said at the beginning, it's a book I've heard of, and I imagine many of us have heard of, but never had the chance to read. So now we get the last chapters.
The last word.
Yeah, good.
Let's see what happens.
Hello. Last week's class is on the website, but not the 3 earlier sessions.
Well, here we are. So,
are we not recording this tonight? Guy, are we not recording?
It is recording.
It's being recorded,
Okay.
but it's not talking to that. So it's on the computer and it's being recorded.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're okay. So here we are at the end of this delicious,
Depressing.
book. So Hank.
Yeah, Hank.
Other lesser men might be a little bit hesitant to respond. I, on the other hand, welcome this kind of challenge.
There you go. So the end of the novel, we have 4 chapters, again, told or vocalized through each of the characters that are left. And this entire section covers one day. And she makes that clear in this very structured way by kind of showing morning, afternoon, evening, late night. And so at the end, you kind of have this compressed day where we're supposed to resolve all that is left to be answered. And most critics see the ending as a coda. What's a coda?
Yeah, sorry.
Go back to
Say it again?
what is it exactly going back to the start?
It's a structured compilation of whatever the subject is.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. So
So there, Hank.
there you go. I haven't gotten to Hank's question yet. So a structured compilation of sort of the major things that come before. And clearly, many of you are seeing what comes before is this consistent repeating pattern of isolation and loneliness, or as Susan said, bad, right? But here's what I want you to think about, and this was sort of your homework. Did anybody get to the end and think that it was hopeful? Hank?
Yes, ma'am. Or at least, yeah. This is life.
Not my life.
Life,
I mean, really.
life. I want to hear from Susan after I have my say. Life, you know, in absence of extraordinary circumstances, it's a series of ups and downs, wins and losses, betting wrong, betting right, getting wrong, getting dumb lucky. And the characters to me that seem to thrive in this book, I guess, are two people. One is Biff, and I think toward the end he realizes, okay, this is a life of ups and downs. Jake has some of that. And then my personal favorite, Portia,
Yes.
her theme is not so much its ups and downs, it's no matter what is happening, we stick together, we keep to our family, we love each other, we forgive each other, we keep no record of wrongs.
It's pretty good. And I agree with you. The person who sort of sneaks in at the end, who's always been on the edges, is Portia. And in some ways, Portia is set up to replace her grandfather, right? In terms of having something beyond herself to believe in. So let me read a quote about Carson McCullers, and then I'm going to ask you the hardest question. So her biographer, Virginia Spencer Carr, her biography is called The Lonely Hunter. It's a really good biography if anybody's into those. Says, above all, Carson felt that she needed God, that she must be able to pray again if she were to effect her own redemption. McCullers, Carr says, recognized God as an omniscient being, a supreme creator who imposed order on the universe, but she sometimes saw him as a capricious deity whose specialty was freaks. And so I've been chewing on that for a few days. I don't think it's a stretch to argue that McCullers is focusing on a spiritual kind of isolation. Is that fair? And that it is fed by and exacerbated by this inability to communicate with one another. So I'm doing my coda, to look for solace and maybe even in salvation in places that are not going to grant that. And then she gets into these really pithy issues like, what does it mean to actually find God? Are you able finally to lose yourself, let go of that ego, and not turn God into a reflection of your own needs? And what would that actually take? And that was the thing that was disturbing Donovan. Like, how do you get there? You know, is the seeking the positive? So for me, the coda is super important, because on the one hand you can go, well, the coda covers one day and looks at the reactions to and ramification of Singer's death, yes? But if McCullers were trying to say it's all for naught, why write the coda? In other words, she could have ended the book with singer suicide, because we already have a sense of where each person is headed or where each person is going, yes? And the power of that moment when we find out that singer shoots himself is so shocking, and so impactful, that it would have been a kicker ending to stop there. Why, Carol?
I feel like I need more help.
Needed more help, what?
What does it mean to find God? That's a question implies that God isn't already there. And if God is always present and always there, then by deduction, eliminating things, we're just making God smaller. So include everything, and like Hank was saying, like, oh, this is part of life. We know people on all of these tracks, and it's everybody has a little piece of something, and it's trying to call it the whole. And so they're leaving out the mystery or the unknown. And if you assume always the presence of God, that God is present in everything, then but that means sometimes being uncomfortable with mystery, being comfortable with not knowing. And if we really, really think we know something, that probably just means that we don't know, we're missing some other information.
Good, good. So if we look at the coda and go through each of the characters who remain, let's see if we can impose order or come to a place of some kind of resolution or understanding. So one way to look, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, to me, the only thing kind of hopeful about it is that Singer's death has kind of freed them from their dependence on him.
Okay.
And now they've kind of turned, so this is kind of showing what they all turn to when that's no longer there, when he's no longer there to be their reflection.
Beautiful.
But I didn't see that they really grew from it particularly.
Okay. So let's work through, okay? Because you're dead on. So one way to approach the last 4 chapters, especially as they kind of represent the movement of a day, is to look at the order in which she presents the characters at the end. And she starts with Copeland, yes, the doctor. And what's happening with him at this very end?
They're taking him to the grandfather's home.
Yes.
Take care of him.
Beautiful. So it's the morning and Copeland is sitting in his kitchen and sort of wrapped up in this shawl. And most of his furniture is already gone, right? And that's going to Portia's house. And everything is ready for him to move to Grandpapa, to his farm. Everything's ready except for Copeland, yes? He refuses to be rushed out. And
Excuse me, Grandpapa is Portia's mother's
correct.
father, right?
Yes,
Okay.
Very good.
I
Okay,
want to make sure I remember that correctly.
that's right.
This is what my daughters are already doing to me.
You think so?
Exactly.
That's way too close to home job.
I'm right there with the old geezers.
So why is Copeland so reluctant to go?
Like every old person, they don't want to lose their independence.
Yes, I too am dealing with these issues myself. Yes. But is it independence that he's really worrying over?
He had his purpose in life that he was consumed with, and it was that he's fearful to leave.
He won't be able to tell his purpose anymore from that location.
Good. So throughout the novel, Copeland is worrying about the plight of the Black race, yes? And for him, the way forward for the race is action. And so he sort of predicates his life on action and pride and courage. And he kind of repeats those things. And by the time we get to the end, he's sort of physically depleted, but he's still wondering who's going to lead the mission? Who's going to lead the mission forward? Yes? So part of what you have to decide, and I love that clarifying question, that he's going to his ex-wife's father's, right, to his father-in-law's for the remainder of his days. It's a curious place for him, don't you think? So why there?
He has nothing but contempt for that man.
Yes.
I remember when he was there, when Grandpa was going on about religion and stuff, and he was just like,
yes,
you know, like,
He's at the bottom. There's nowhere else he can go.
yeah.
we could go to Portia's.
I don't think Portia's got room for him.
That's never stopped any parent. So here's a choice you get to make when you look at Copeland's chapter. So I'm like in the second page of chapter 1. This could not truly be the end. Other voices called wordless in his heart. The voice of Jesus and of John Brown. The voice of the great Spinoza and of Karl Marx. The calling voices of all those who had fought and to whom it had been vouchsafed to complete their missions. The grief-bound voices of his people, and also the voice of the dead, of the mute singer who was a righteous white man of understanding. No. The voices of the weak and of the mighty, the rolling voice of the people growing always in strength and in power, the voice of the strong, true purpose. And in answer, the words trembled on his lips, the words which are surely the root of all human grief, so that he almost said aloud, Almighty host, utmost power of the universe, I have done those things which I ought not to have done, and left undone those things which I ought to have done. So this cannot truly be the end. He had first come into the house with her whom he loved, and Daisy was dressed in her bridal gown and wore a white lace veil. Her skin was the beautiful color of dark honey, and her laughter was sweet. At night he had shut himself in the bright room to study alone. He had tried to cogitate and to discipline himself to study, but with Daisy near him, there was a strong desire in him that would not go away with study. So sometimes he surrendered to those feelings, and again he bit his lips and meditated with the books throughout the night. And then there were Hamilton and Karl Marx and William and Portia, all lost, no one remained. What is he talking about?
He failed to recreate any of them in his image.
And the purpose.
Yes, yes. That,
Recruit them to carry on for him. None of them see things the way he sees them.
very good. And it's a fascinating sort of moment where he's kind of going through the past as if he is some kind of shepherd or pastor or missionary, yes, but his mission in his view has not been complete. What is he missing?
Somebody to carry it on. Yeah.
Well, let's think about it. What does he see as his mission? Good.
To change other people.
Yes.
But
Or
if you spiritually, like you're asking about where God is, if God's still there, if God's not on a coffee break, well then he doesn't have to be in such a dinner.
So, what is his mission, y'all? What is the mission?
To improve the plight of the black man.
Yes. And how does that happen?
Through action
and education.
Yes. That they have to unite,
Understand.
in some kind of unifying purpose and understanding and take action.
He envisaged a march on Washington,
Yes. Which
Which
is
would
sort of
sound-
prescient, isn't it?
which would have sounded a little bit off in 1939 or
Right.
40.
Yes.
But he was such a failure in his communication with anybody.
Yes.
He couldn't even get his own family to listen to him.
Yes.
Much less other people around.
Very good.
I thought he was one of the more discouraging characters.
But
Yes.
There may be people in this room that had a communication breakdown with various family members over the years. In all of them.
He had communications downgrades with everybody. I mean, he wasn't able to communicate with anybody effectively. But even his guy that he gave the award to, Lance, was killed.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
bad.
Bad. Real bad. Yeah. So,
The
look,
passage you just read though makes me hear in it sort of a great cloud of witnesses. That, there's so much religious language
yes.
in that,
Yes.
although he's uncoupling it from the source and using it for a different purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
So here we go. The problem with Dr. Copeland is if you explain his mission, right, it sounds well-intentioned. But the problem is that, again, he's turned this mission into a religion that only includes others in his dream. In other words, I agree. Of the characters who are left, he's the one who understands the least. All he's doing is declaring himself a failure to have completed this great, delivering this, great message and inspiring action. But for the most part, he's alone. And I love that passage where he remembers back to the day when he marries this woman who was just beautiful and lovely and kind and giving. But somehow he believes that in order to complete his mission, she gets pushed aside. It has to be alone. he can't even enjoy her without thinking he's in some way betrayed this mission. So Copeland is never able to go outside himself at all. And so he's silent even when he's speaking. Does that make sense? So if you look at this day in the morning, he ends up the most defeated. And look what this conversation is with the father-in-law. Yes, Benedict, maybe I'm right glad to have you with us again. I've been waiting to ask you about this peculiar feeling in my right foot, a queer feeling like my foot gone to sleep. I've taken 666 and rubbed it with liniment. I was hoping you'll find me a good treatment. I will do what I can. Yes, I'm glad to have you. I believe in kin folks sticking together, blood kin and marriage kin. I believe in all of us struggling along and helping each other out. And someday us will have a reward in the beyond. So if you break down what his father-in-law is saying, someone who has every right to detest him, yes? Because it doesn't just sort of abandon the family from the beginning. They don't become soldiers in his army, and he becomes violent with the grandfather's daughter. And he is willing to take him in, and what he's saying is the message you're supposed to get as a reader. I believe in kin folks sticking together, blood kin and marriage kin. I believe in all of us struggling along and helping each other out. It's the same message. All of us getting together and struggling it out. But here he is talking about a togetherness that is communion, as opposed to, I have these ideas of action and you must, execute these, and who's going to be worthy to do that? He felt the fire in him and he could not be still. He wanted to sit up and speak in a loud voice, yet when he tried to raise himself, he could not find the strength. The words in his heart grew big and they would not be silent, but the old man had ceased to listen and there was no one to hear him.
That's very not helpful for Copeland.
I don't think it's hopeful for Copeland. What's hopeful is the message that he never hears and cannot communicate. And that is everything about him has turned inward. And so what you have, the last word is not from Copeland. Again, it's the father-in-law. Get Lee Jackson, get honey, pick up your feet and quit this here poking. Us got a long way to go.
And the grandfather, who wasn't trying to proselytize, has all of the kids leading like he does.
Yes, and I agree.
Portia and
that's exactly where I'm going. I agree with Hank. The hopeful character in this family, maybe apart from grandfather, is Portia, who is living the gospel of the grandfather.
Yeah.
The way in which, and notice how many times it's clear that that triptych relies upon one another to move forward in life. And that no matter how difficult things get, because Portia could be wallowing in it too. She gets paid half the time. Look what happens to Willie. Her life has a lot of trouble and difficulty, but she is living in a brotherhood or sisterhood or personhood, whatever you want to call it, that makes her, to me, profoundly hopeful. Does Copeland get anything at the end? I don't think so. And here's one way you can look at this coda. If you measure how it works out, going from Copeland to Blount to Mick to Biff, what you have is a movement from least understanding to perhaps most understanding in this group of people. And that may be enormously hopeful. Do I think Copeland is a hopeful character? No. But what's hopeful to me is I totally get what he's missing. That turning completely inside, I mean, his mission to bring all of these people together turns into an obsession of one, yes? And so he can shout, and I do have compassion for that character, and I love when Portia says a few minutes earlier, she goes, why do you keep grieving? Why do you have to keep grieving? What's he grieving for? Himself. And that cannot ever work out well. So then, who's next?
It may not be a bad thing that Copeland's mission is failed.
Correct. And I think what's fascinating, and of course she could never have known this or anticipated that, you know, when you think about, you know, you can, when you think about this march, this dream, this march on Washington, which actually becomes a Martin Luther King Jr. thing, right? Way past 1937. And then you go, okay, what's the difference between Martin Luther King Jr. and Dr. Copeland, right? And here's the thing, it's also the old physician, heal thyself. He's a doctor whose mission is healing, but doesn't seem really connected to it at all, right? Does it?
And dollars, he can't even see the good he has done.
Yes.
In his life.
That's right.
The healing of all
That's
the
right.
people in his community.
Yes. What could have brought all of those people together in healing, he can't see because he can't get outside of himself. That's sad.
Yeah.
But I think the message for you is supposed to be hopeful in the sense that there's an alternative way, right? Remember, she talks about, Carson McCullers talks about this book as allegory, and you're going, what allegory, you know, or parable. You know, parable has to have a lesson, yes? As opposed to, man, I wish things would work out for these crazy kids, because it's not gonna happen, right? Then we go to Jake. Does Jake have, all right, well, what do you make of Jake at the end? I won't tell you, I'll ask you. So when we see Jake at the end, you know, he's in the middle of a riot, basically.
He sees himself as something bigger than, I'm sorry, he sees himself as part of something bigger than himself, which gives him a purpose. I think that's how he finds himself.
What do you mean? I'm with you so far.
I can speak for the proletariat. I can help them understand how they've been used. And if they would just listen to me, then we together could improve their lot.
Well, that's what he's been talking about the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
He's been ineffective at it. And the last part I remember of him is walking down the road to go to another town with the money that Biff gave.
But to still stay in the South. He was resolved to stay in the South where he feels he's called to do his work.
That's right.
He turns north, though. But who gave him that advice to go find your people? be around others who were thinking like you. Was it this? Yeah.
Okay, you're getting this. So he is in the middle of this brawl that happens, you know, on the fairgrounds, and ends up on the ground next to the dead Lacey. And at that moment realizes he has to get out. And he ends up, as he often does, in the cafe with Biff. And okay, in my book, it's 4:16. So it's near the end of this chapter. See if you can find this. Biff says, "What do you mean to do now?" "I'm leaving. I'm getting out of here this afternoon." Brandon polished his nails on the palm of his hand. "Well, of course it's not necessary, but it might be a good thing. Why so headlong? No sense in starting out this time of day. I do think it behooves you to make a new start. At the same time, why don't you take my advice on this? Myself, I'm a conservative, and of course I think your opinions are radical. But at the same time, I like to know all sides of a matter. Anyway, I want to see you straighten out, so why don't you go someplace where you can meet a few people more or less like yourself, and then settle down." Jake pushed his plate irritably away from him. "I don't know where I'm going. Leave me alone. I'm tired." Brandon shrugged his shoulders and went back to the counter. He was tired enough. The hot rum and the heavy sound of the rain made him drowsy. It felt good to be sitting safe in a booth and to have just eaten a good meal. If he wanted to, he could lean over and take a nap, a short one. "How long will this rain keep on?" Brandon's voice had drowsy overtones. "You can't tell. A tropical cloudburst might clear up suddenly or might thin a little and set in for the night." Jake laid his head down on his arms. The sound of the rain was like the swelling sound of the sea. He heard a clock tick and the far-off rattle of dishes. Gradually, his hands relaxed. They lay open, palm upward on the table. So he has a dream, yes? And Biff wakes him up. And I love this. "What was it?" Brandon said. Was the devil chasing you?" Jake stood up and went to the mirror behind the counter. His face was dirty and sweaty. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. "The dream was nothing. You've got to be asleep to understand why it was such a nightmare." The clock pointed to 5:30. The rain had almost stopped. "So long, I'll send you a postcard maybe." "Wait, you can't go now. It's still raining a little. Just dripping off the awning. I'd rather get out of town before dark." "But hold on, do you have money?" "I don't need money. I've been broke before." Brandon had an envelope ready, and in it were two $20 bills. That's a lot of money. Jake looked at them on both sides and put them in his pocket. "God knows why you do it. You never smell them again, but thanks. I won't forget. Good luck, and let me hear from you." The door closed behind him. When he looked back at the end of the block, Brandon was watching from the sidewalk. He walked until he reached the railroad tracks. On either side, there were rows of dilapidated two-room houses. Now and then, there were signs that a vegetable row had been attempted, but only a few withered collards had survived. The sight of this poverty was so cruel and hopeless that Jake snarled and clenched his fists. He reached the edge of the town and turned off on a highway. Cars passed by him. His shoulders were too wide and his arms too long. He was so strong and ugly that no one wanted to take him in, but maybe a truck would stop before long. Heat made the steam rise from the wet pavement. Jake walked steadily. As soon as the town was behind, a new surge of energy came to him. But was this flight or was it onslaught? Anyway, he was going. all was to begin another time. The road ahead lay to the north and slightly to the west, and he would not go too far away. He would not leave the south. That was one clear thing. There was hope in him, and soon perhaps the outline of his journey would take form. Hopeful?
He's hopeful. I'm not hopeful because I don't see how he's gonna do anything differently than what he's done.
Yeah, I don't see that he's learned anything new.
He's drunk.
Yeah, he is.
And he wants to be a labor organizer, and I don't see anything that says he's gonna be successful at it. He's just getting out of town because he was in trouble and he needed to get out of town.
Yep. Do?
I mean, I think he's probably headed kind of in the same direction as Dr. Copeland. Those two characters are so similar to me, and maybe there's hope right now for Jake, but I feel like at the end, his missions are not gonna be accomplished because he cannot communicate and he's too angry.
Okay.
And he's from a small southern town that still doesn't have.
Yeah, this happened.
100 years later.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting in the, you know, part of King's desire was to get the poor, you know, realizing that there's issues with socioeconomics that transcend race, and the strength of Copeland and him together, having such myopic vision instead of finding the ways to come together around that. I thought that was interesting.
So, again, if there's anything hopeful about Jake, it's limited. Part of what you see in this last chapter, though, okay, when we met Jake at the beginning, he was utterly out of control, yes? To the point where he's beating himself, his head against a brick wall.
Yeah.
And filled with rage, yes? And drinking. And when we see him in this last section, I wouldn't say there's a huge transformation, but when that riot is occurring, what does he do?
He tries to break it up.
Yes, he tries to impose order. He is not the same Jake that we saw at the beginning. And when he goes to the cafe, he's exhausted. And the only solace is Biff, who makes this gesture that is completely selfless, yes? Giving someone $40 in the Depression, especially a guy who doesn't really have a lot of money.
And a free meal.
And he has it ready. And he tries to say to him, why don't you go somewhere else where there might be some like-minded people? And Jake refuses. But the last we see of Jake is this moving steadily, which we don't see of Jake through most of this novel. Usually he's off kilter all the time. And there does seem to be meaning in this gesture from Biff. A completely selfless, outward moving gesture. And he is going to go forward. He's not quitting. He's not utterly defeated in the way that Copeland is defeated. Is he ever going to have great success in the South? Nah. but he's a different person than the person we met. Do you get that? So if we go from utterly defeated because he's completely internalized to there's been some change, part of which is probably connected to Biff. Then we get to Mick. Any hope there? Yes?
I love that she wants to hide a piano underneath the house.
Yeah. Yes.
That dream is not completely gone, even as it's so impractical. And that, you know, the music's died, but she is making the payments on the radio.
Yeah. That's huge. Yes? So we know Mick is in a sad grown-up place, yes? That this isn't gonna be a part-time gig at the Woolworths, right? That she's taken on these grown-up responsibilities, okay? That's different from the others in the sense that, and we talked about this a little bit last week, the fact that she's willing to move away from the inside room as a gesture of sacrifice for this family. It's an act of love, right? I don't even know if she could articulate that, but a selfish teenager would have just said, see ya. Yes, I want mine.
And in the book, it talks about, I think she recognized it as the love for her family.
Yes. So she's actually enacting what grandfather says is the way toward meaning in life. And you see her in her last section, having little access, she says, to the inside room, yes? But you also know that she's the one who found Singer, which is harsh, yes? She's a child. She was the one who found him. They had thought the noise was a backfire from a car, and it was not until the next day that they knew. She went in to play the radio. The blood was all over his neck, and when her dad came, he pushed her out of the room. She had run from the house. The shock wouldn't let her be still. She had run into the dark and hit herself with her fists. And then the next night, he was in a coffin in the living room. The undertaker had put rouge and lipstick on his face to make him look natural, but he didn't look natural. He was very dead. And mixed with the smell of flowers, there was this other smell so that she couldn't stay in the room. But through all those days, she held down the job. She wrapped packages, handed them across the counter and rung the money in the till. She walked when she was supposed to walk and ate when she sat down to the table. Only at first when she went to bed at night, she couldn't sleep, but now she slept like she was supposed to also.
Someone who's defeated.
What?
That sounds like someone who is defeated. Or she's
Or it's the opposite.
She's accepted it. She's accepted reality.
My thought is that this is Carson McCullers' sort of thought of, I gotta get out of here. And the other part about this book, I mean, you look at Southern literature, this is not an attractive town in this book.
No.
No, not at all. And even in, you know, you look at others, a lot of others books, the towns have a feel, an atmosphere, a charm, not here.
100%, and that is true this is how every Carson McCullers book starts, in a town, in the deep South, and they all are part of that modernist kind of wasteland, like it's not nice. And part of what she's always trying to figure out is the question you all are trying to figure out, where is the hope or is there none? Either you see Mick as this defeated automaton, or you see that she keeps going. She doesn't just run. She runs and then shows up at work. And then, I love this part. Mick pushed her broken front tooth with her thumb, but she did have Mr. Singer's radio. All the installments hadn't been paid, and she took on the responsibility. It was good to have something that had belonged to him. And maybe one of these days she might be able to put aside a little for a secondhand piano, say $2 a week. And she wouldn't let anybody touch this private piano but her, only she might teach George little pieces. I love that. Because, yes, her life is utterly limited in this tiny little town in the middle of the Depression, where she takes on the responsibility of helping to support the family. But then there's more. She pays for the radio. She doesn't cut herself off from the music. And what is different about Nick is the music that has always been her inside room. First she says, I'm going to keep that private. But then she says, but maybe I'll teach George a few little pieces.
And she dared everybody not to touch her secret box, which is kind of the precursor to the imaginary piano. Don't touch it.
But maybe it would be true about the piano and turn out okay. This is the very end of her chapter. Maybe she would get a chance soon. Else, what the hell good had it all been? The way she felt about music and the plans she had made in the inside room. It had to be some good if anything made sense. And it was two, and it was two, and it was two, and it was two. It was some good. All right, okay, some good. That is enormously powerfully hopeful to me. Because she is no longer a child, and she is taking on these responsibilities, and she is trying to figure out how her life can have meaning. She's not a defeated kid. It was two, it was two, it was two. All right, okay, some good. And then you have Biff. If this moves from, the coda moves from least understanding to most understanding, do you see Biff as a hopeful character? Why, Guy, why?
I said before class started when I was talking to Sue, this whole section reminded me so much of Hemingway's A Clean, Well-Lighted Place. One of my favorite little essays. That he keeps this cafe open that's not making money as a place for these weird people to come and hang out. And he cares for them, he creates community there. I mean, he himself is a little, piece of work, but it's a work of building community. And so we talk about a third place where we can go to, and in this little town, this was that place.
Why does he say it's all a riddle?
Yeah, why does he?
I'm asking you.
No, I'm asking you. Is it not?
That may be the only explanation for what we've been talking about.
What do you mean?
Well, that it's not about having a plan that we can figure out, control, including the outcome, that's not what life, or to put it in theological terms, or salvation is about. And that's not, to me, very hopeful, but.
Why?
Because it should be, I think we think it should be better than the plight that we are engaged in. Life, things should be better than this.
Jeremiah Johnson,
Well,
at the end of that movie, Jeremiah meets up with Bear Claw. It's an out and back, but
Yep.
he meets up with Bear Claw at the beginning and at the end of the journey. And he says, all have been different. And Bear Claw says, many's the pilgrims come as high, and said that, and it ain't different.
And part of what I think, well, we'll work through this part to end, but part of what, I'm with you. Part of the reason I think that the Mick portion and the life of Portia are so helpful, fascinating that they're women, is that there's some good. There's some good.
And I think Biff sees a spark in Mick.
Yes. Yeah.
he sure, clearly, he does.
So what do you make of this? Go ahead, Guy.
You know, I think I told you at one point, Sue, I had a close friend who was doing a PhD in Ecclesiastes and Walker Percy's novels to try to come up with a affirmation of life's positive possibilities against the Odyssey, right? And it occurs to me, this is a novel she could have included in that.
Yeah.
That against a black light, any glimmer of hope is hope. And I think, John, you know, I appreciate your comment that it should be better than that. And for most of us in this room, it is.
Yes.
But for a lot of people, it's not. And I think she's pushing us there in a way to say, what then can we, in the wave of these major tragedies of systematic racism and growing poverty and all of that, instead of those big things, what little things can we do?
Yes.
In family and building community and all of that?
Yes. And all the even limitedly hopeful characters, that's what separates them. This willingness to keep engaging outside of themselves. And that is the hope of some kind of salvation here. So what do you make of this? Biff tiptoed across the kitchen to a shelf which held a basket of tea olives and 2 water pitchers full of zinnias. He carried the flowers up to the front of the restaurant and removed the cellophane wrapped platters of the last special from the display window. He was sick of food. A window of fresh summer flowers, that would be good. And then we know, he talks about the zinnia, and then we know that he puts on his wife's perfume. So there are several spots or places in this book where after his wife's death, Biff becomes more and more feminine. And then you kind of, as a reader, are going, okay, bud, what's happening here? Are you becoming yet another Carson McCullers freakish character, or is he recognizing, and I love it because it sort of, it is one of those notes McCullers plays all the way through. Is he recognizing the power of the feminine in terms of nurturing, moving outward. Even at the beginning, you got Anatopoulos going, "Darling Mary." I love that line, "Darling Mary." And at the same time, he's aware that what he's doing isn't financially smart. But he would never close up for the night, not as long as he stayed in the business. Night was the time. This is so a Plymouth-lighted place.
Yeah.
There were those he would never have seen otherwise. A few came regularly several times a week. Others had come into the place only once, had drunk a Coca-Cola and never returned. Biff folded his arms across his chest and walked more slowly. Inside the arc of the street light, his shadow showed angular and black. The peaceful silence of the night settled in him. There were the hours for rest and meditation. Maybe that was why he stayed downstairs and did not sleep. With a last quick glance, he skimmed the empty street and went inside. And then it says, "And Nick, the one who in the last months had lived so strangely in his heart. Was that love done with too? Yes, it was finished. Early in the evenings, Mick came in for a cold drink or a sundae. She had grown older. Her rough and childish ways were almost gone. And instead, there was something ladylike and delicate about her that was hard to point out. Then, the riddle. The question had taken root in him and would not let him rest. The puzzle of Singer and the rest of them. More than a year had gone since it had started. More than a year since Blount had hung around the place on his first long drunk. He had managed about the funeral. They had left all that to him. Singer's affairs were in a mess. The silence in the room was deep as the night. Biff stood transfixed, lost in his meditations. Then suddenly, he felt a quickening in him. His heart turned, and he leaned his back against the counter for support. For in a swift radiance of illumination, he saw a glimpse of human struggle and valor, of the endless fluid passage of humanity through endless time, and of those who labor and of those who, one word, love. His soul expanded, but for a moment only, for in him he felt a warning, a shaft of terror. Between the two worlds, he was suspended. It's pretty good. Of all of the people, he's creating that space. And there's a possibility of illumination. I don't know. I like it.
So why is he suspended? Why can't she let him have that moment of expanding?
I think that it's a journey. I mean, does illumination, complete illumination, come to you in one moment? What we know is he's not going to close, and he should.
Especially since he gave $40.
Yes, but he doesn't.
And the guy's asleep, you know.
Yes.
Anybody can walk in and take your
Yes.
pie off the counter, you know.
Y'all,
Yeah.
it's the we of me. Remember that? The we of me. Do you remember that from, what's that from?
Remember the wedding.
No, the we of me. The we of me is Steinbeck.
Rachel Rapp.
But it's also Emma Colors, Remember the Wedding.
I don't remember that, but now I like that better too.
The girl,
Frankie,
when she's talking about that she wants to be with.
yes.
She said they are the
we of me. That is exactly right.
And then do you include the chrysanthemum when part of it has a different color?
Yes.
And he saves it.
Yes.
So the different and the odd, and we're saving, and it's all part of the whole.
Yes.
and it's okay to trust the mystery, and I get that. Last part you said, and that's kind of the human condition.
Yeah.
We're hanging there, so you have to trust.
And the one act, love.
And what I liked it, she could have ended the story with between bitter irony and fate.
Yep.
And all of philosophy, and instead, somehow he remembered that the awning had not been raised.
That's right. Yes. Come on. Susan, we pulled it out.
Thank you so much, Sue.
My pleasure. Maybe, whatever, the grocery store, maybe? What is that thing? What is it called?
Oh, the Heaven and Earth.
Heaven and Earth grocery store.
I know, guy, and I'll have to read it.
Yeah, we'll have to read it. Now, I have read, his first book, which I like quite a bit.